Alright folks, so I'm going to show you how to analyze a persuasive speech based on the different elements that are in it. The women who were speaking were white women, and they were not considering the fact that a black woman might have a different experience, especially considering the time period. This is 1851. This is before the Civil War, so slavery was still happening during this time period. Okay, now that you understand the context, I found a recording of the wonderful actress Kerry Washington reading this speech, and I will let her read it to you instead of me. So here we go.
Well, children, where there is so much racket, there must be something out of kilter. I think that twixt the Negroes of the South and the women at the North all talking about rights, the white man gonna be in a fix pretty soon. But what's all this here talking about? That man over there says that women need to be helped into carriages and lifted over ditches and to have the best place everywhere. Nobody ever helps me into carriages or over mud puddles or gives me any best place. And ain't I a woman? Look at me. Look at my arm. I have plowed and planted and gathered into barns, and no man could head me. And ain't I a woman? I could work as much and eat as much as any man when I could get it. And I could bear the lash as well. And ain't I a woman? I have borne 13 children, seen most sold off into slavery. And when I cried out with a mother's grief, none but Jesus heard me. And ain't I a woman? And they talk about this thing in the head. What is it they call it? Oh, that's right, yeah, intellect. That's it, honey. Well, what's that got to do with women's rights and Negroes' rights? If my cup won't hold but a pint and y'all holds a quart, wouldn't you be mean not to let me have my little half measure full? That man in the back there, he says we can't have as much rights as men because Christ wasn't a woman. Well, where did your Christ come from? Where did your Christ come from? He came from God and a woman. Man didn't have nothing to do with it. If the first woman God ever made was strong enough to turn the world upside down all alone, well, these women here together ought to be able to turn it back and get it right side up again. And they asking to do it. The men better let them.
And she didn't read the last part, but obliged to you for hearing me, and now old Sojourner ain't got nothing more to say. I've read through the speech the first time, which is always the first step in any kind of close reading exercise. So next, what you want to do is figure out the argument or the central idea, the who should do what, because why. So who is Sojourner Truth talking to in this speech? Is she talking to other women? No, to me it seems like the women at the convention that she's speaking at are already on board with her. Is she speaking to white people? Maybe, but I don't see a whole lot that specifically focuses on racism. There's a little bit, like when she mentions her children being sold off to slavery, but most of it seems to be about women's rights in general. So I think, especially based on the last few lines here, where it says, now that women are asking to do it, the men better let them, I think that her message is directed at men. So men would be her audience. So if I'm coming up with the central idea, the argument here, the who part is going to be men should. Okay, now I want to see what is Sojourner Truth trying to convince the men to do. Okay, so basically what she's arguing for is men should allow women equal rights, and then we need the evidence, the because why part. Okay, so we just did this, but look back at the main idea of each of her paragraphs here. So this says the people of color and the women are asking for rights. In this one, she says that she's equal to a man because she has survived all kinds of horrific trials, even though she is a woman. Here, she says that intellect doesn't matter, so even if you assume women are not as smart as men, it shouldn't make a difference as far as rights. We already talked about this paragraph, and then she says, if the first woman God ever made was strong enough to turn the world upside down all alone, so that's referring to Eve from the Bible, these first women together ought to be able to turn it back and get it right side up again. And now that they're asking to do it, the men better let them. Okay, so what all of these situations have in common here is she is emphasizing women's capabilities and saying that they're equal to men's in every way, except for maybe intellect, but in this case she argues that it doesn't matter much. So our central idea here is men should allow women equal rights because women are equally capable. Okay, I'll just leave it there. Men should allow women equal rights because women are equally capable. So when you have to come up with the argument, the who should do what because why, you're figuring out who's the audience, who is the speaker talking to, what does the speaker want them to do, and then what is the evidence offered for why the target audience should follow the speaker's directions. So that's how you find the central idea or the argument. Alright, next, you need to reread the speech another time and find at least one example of logos, pathos, and ethos. Now, we've already talked about those, but I'm going to show you how they show up in Ain't I a Woman? As you find these, you're either going to underline them and label them out next to it by the side, or you can highlight or underline them in different colors and provide a key. I'm going to do the second one just because I like colors. So my logos is going to be in blue. My pathos is going to be in orange, and my ethos is going to be in green. Okay, and now there is more than one example of each of these probably in this speech and the one you're going to look at, but I'm only asking you to find one each. So, Sojourner Truth, the speaker, uses logos in this next to last paragraph here where she says, if the first woman ever made enough to turn the world upside down all alone, these women together ought to be able to turn it back and get it right side up again. This is logos because she is making the claim that if women work together, they would be able to fix the world, and she's using an anecdote from the Bible as proof of that. So she's offering a claim and she's giving evidence, which makes this logos an argument based on fact or reason. You could also say up here, where she's drawing a comparison between her and the things that she's gone through in her life, that show that she's just as capable as a man. So like she's plowed and planted and gathered into barns, she could eat as much as a man, she could bear the lash like a man. All of this could also count as a logos argument, because she's trying to prove the fact that she's equal to a man. Pathos is any kind of emotional appeal, and she uses that multiple times. I think in particular she uses humor, like up here at the beginning where she says the white men will be in a fix pretty soon. She also tries to create an effect of sympathy for her. Here, when she says, I've borne 13 children and seen most all sold off to slavery. When I cried out with my mother's grief, none but Jesus heard me. You feel bad for her when she says that, so that is a pathos appeal. Ethos. I have said before that a lot of times there is a bit of overlap between logos and ethos at times, and I think in this case there definitely is some overlap between logos and ethos, because here where she is saying, look at me, look at my arm, I plowed and planted, gathered into barns, no man can head me. All of this she's listed experiences could count as ethos, because they are proof, based on her own reputation and experiences, that she knows what she's talking. The next step is to find some examples of advanced rhetorical devices in the speech. The first thing you're going to find is to state. Okay. Obviously, one thing that she repeats multiple times is, ain't I a woman? Ain't I a woman? Ain't I a woman? Ain't I a woman? Anytime they're repeating the same words, the same sentence, or sometimes generally just repeating the same idea, that is being used for impact and emphasis. So if I were to find repetition for this, she's repeating ain't I a woman because she's trying to emphasize the fact that despite all of these things she was able to do, she's still a woman. Okay, another thing you would need to find is parallelism. In this particular speech, there's not parallelism. She almost gets there, but what that would look like was if she said, the man over there says that women need to be helped into carriages, to be lifted over ditches, and to have the best place everywhere. But she doesn't exactly do that. However, in the speech that you're looking at, there will definitely be parallelism. Alright, antithesis. Antithesis is a tough one, but that's when you've got really different words, images, or ideas right next to each other. I love how she uses antithesis here in the next to last paragraph, where she says, if the first woman God ever made was strong enough to turn the world upside down all alone, these women together ought to be able to turn it back and get it right side up again. So upside down all alone versus right side up again. These two are opposite ideas, and she's setting a contrast between them, which makes this antithesis. Last thing you need to find is a rhetorical question. Alright, Sojourner Truth uses rhetorical questions throughout, such as when she says, what's all this here talking about? When she famously says, ain't I a woman? She uses one here. When she repeats, where did your Christ come from? Oh, it's another repetition. That is a rhetorical question. So she uses those a lot. Anytime you ask a question that's not meant to have an answer, that's a rhetorical question. The next thing you're going to need to look at is your SOAPStone chart. Now, some of this you already answered on the other side, and that's okay. We're just going into a little bit more detail on it in this case. So, who's the speaker? The reason why we're clarifying that is because the person who is actually speaking and the speaker are not always one and the same, but in the case of this speech, they are. So the speaker is Sojourner Truth. She's the one giving the speech. Okay. She is a black woman who is, based on this, you don't know if she is a former slave or a current slave. So I'm going to say former or current slave. And I'm going to add in the time period in this case because that's relevant. The fact that this is 1851 makes a big difference as far as the content of her speech in 1851. Okay, the voice tells the story. Whose voice is being heard within the text? I think just black females in general, because they felt ignored by the mainstream women's rights movement, which, like I said, only focused on the experiences of white women who are being treated very differently from black women. So black women. And what can you tell or what do you know about the speaker that helps you understand the point of view expressed? Okay. She was treated differently because she was not a white woman. Okay, now we move on to occasion. Alright, occasion is the time, place, and situation of the speech. And this means both literally the exact day, if you have that, but also generally, historically and culturally, what was happening when this speech was given. So we know exactly, this was Akron, Ohio in 1851. What is the current situation that prompted the writing? It's a women's rights convention. This is a political event, so that's something that's kind of covered in saying it's a women's rights convention. Identify the context of the text. By context, it means probably what's happening in history at this time. This is 1851, so this is 70 years before the 19th Amendment was passed, which gave women the right to vote. Who are the readers to whom this piece is directed? It may be one person or a specific group. Alright, this is talking to men. It's saying, men, please give us our rights. Does the speaker specify an audience? No, I think she implies it, so she doesn't specifically say it, but sometimes at the beginning of the speech they'll list out specifically who they are talking to. Alright, what assumptions exist in the text about the intended audience? Alright, she assumes that the men do not want to give them the rights, so I'm going to put that. Alright, next we have purpose. Alright, purpose. What is the purpose behind the text? Why did the author write it? What is his or her goal? To find the purpose, ask, what did the author want his audience to think or do as a result of reading this text? Well, we already figured that out. Men should allow women equal rights because women are equally capable. Alright. So our purpose is for men to give women equal rights. Alright, what is the message? Okay, message and purpose are kind of interrelated. Her message is the evidence for why men should give women equal rights, so this is also what we've already figured out. Her message is that women are as capable as men. Alright, the tricky part is, how does the speaker convey this message? She conveys the message by, in this paragraph, where she talks about her experiences and the suffering that she's gone through, but handled it just as well as a man would. Okay, probably not the most eloquently I've ever put that, but she lists the experiences she's had that make her equal to a man. Alright, what is the subject? What topic, content, and ideas are included in the text? State the subject in a few words or a short phrase. Okay, in this you're just kind of listing out the general topics that she discusses, so obviously women's rights. Okay, is there more than one subject? Well, yeah, we kind of already covered that. How does the author present the subject? Does he introduce it immediately, or do you have to make an inference? She states it directly. I'm just going to write that out to the side. Alright, now the tone. Alright, so tone is the author's attitude or emotions towards what it is that they're talking about. So what is the attitude of the author? Is the author emotional, objective, neutral, or biased about the topic? Okay. If I had to pick an emotion word to describe her, particularly in this paragraph, the most famous one, I would say she sounds confident and maybe frustrated at the same time. Is the author emotional, objective, neutral, biased about the topic? Okay, she's definitely emotional, and she is biased. Bias is not always a bad thing. It just means that you have an opinion that you're expressing, and she definitely is expressing an opinion here. She's not neutral. Alright, what types of details tell the author's feelings about the topic? What types of diction? That's word choice. Syntax and instruction. Imagery, like metaphor, simile, types of figurative language help reflect the tone. How would you read the passage aloud if you were the author? Okay, I kind of group all of these together because they're just asking about how does the author use language to reveal tone. This is kind of where finding your advanced rhetorical devices helps you. I'm going to say use of repetition and rhetorical questions, word choice, okay, so I put her use of repetition and rhetorical questions, so that would be referring specifically to ain't I a woman and where did your Christ come from? And then I noted a specific example of her word choice when she cried out with her mother's grief. Right, that gets you emotionally involved and it shows how passionate she is about this subject. and particularly that painful memory that she's talking about here. Okay, how would you read the passage aloud if you were the author? Well, I definitely wouldn't read it aloud monotonously. I wouldn't say, that man over there says that women need to be helped into carriages. I would say it with some passion. That man over there says that women need to be helped into carriages and lifted over ditches and have the best place everywhere. I would say it with a passionate, animated tone. So I'm going to put those words there. Passionate. A SOAPStone analysis. There's a lot of steps to it, but if you do it right, by the time you're done, you have a very solid understanding of the speech and how the author creates meaning in it.